Good morning. It's Tuesday, July 26th, 2022. Welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. This is the Western Standard's daily news, opinion, interview, you name it sort of show. We cover a bit of everything, some tasteless stories, some important stories, some good rants on my part, and some that don't necessarily hit home. It's a live show. And because of that, we have that comment scroll, and I really encourage you guys to use it. Get on there, share your thoughts, share your feedback, send questions to my guests, send questions to me. I won't necessarily answer every one of them or pass them along, but I do read them all as they go by, and they do help keep the program fluid. As I said, we get a lot of hiccups now and then and bloopers and such. That comes with being live, but the fun part is having that interaction, and it makes it worth the other challenges that come doing a live broadcast like this. So good to see you all checking in from across the country there in Ontario and Calgary with Wendy, Hazel, Jarrett, all sorts of folks there, and somebody in the Honduras even. Must be warmer weather than now. So let's get on to some of the observances today and stuff that's important that you have to know. You don't want to miss out on this. This is Aunts and Uncles Day, in case you didn't already know. This is the day, I guess, you get out there and celebrate them. I don't know if there's cards for this one. You can always hand draw one. Aunts and uncles are always fun. Everybody's always got the weird drunk uncle or the strange aunt, don't they? The oddball out there, or the fun one, or perhaps the one you just don't talk to. Today's the day to observe that next step of your family tree, getting a little farther out there and celebrate the contribution they have to your family, or lack of. But I mean, it can be a lot of fun. This is the day for it. Not a lot of observances today. I guess in midsummer, most people are up and out and about and doing things, but all the same, there are still things to be watched. It's also all or nothing day. So yeah, this is where you give it all. That's a good image Nico found of it. Hey, don't mess around, just jump that cliff. And there is no halfway on, I guess, that stunt, right? You're either going to splatter on the bottom of a big cliff, or you're going to have made it all the way out there. I don't know if it's the best of advice with everything, but all the same, today, if you're sitting there wondering on something, not sure if you should go for it, today's the day. All or nothing. Go for it. You don't have anything to lose. Well, maybe you do, but it's the day to consider it. All right, let's see. We've got a couple of great guests as usual. Retired professor of anthropology from Manitoba, Hymie Rubenstein. He's been writing columns for us. He's been writing stuff for the Dorchester Review and putting things out all over the place. Very focused on the Indian residential school issue, grave sites, and also with the Pope's visit and apologies. So we're going to discuss a bit of that with Hymie and see what's going on and how things are being received and where we're going with it. And then Western Standard columnist Myke Thomas is going to come in. Myke's been in a lot of times. He writes about all sorts of stuff. It's always a fun conversation. But real estate is really one of the areas of specialty for Myke. And he wrote some pieces recently about some houses, those ones to die for if you won a number of lotteries to be able to buy. But also I'd like to talk to him a little bit about, because we're hearing some pretty distressing rumbles about the real estate market, that we could be entering a bubble situation, meaning that home equity of yours might be coming down really quickly. It's been going up for quite some time for most people anyways, and we might have a really big correction. And of course, a lot of people are concerned about that. So let me get on to what I'm going to be ranting about, and that's what's in the title of this. And it's been unfortunate to watch. So politics, it's always been a game of gotcha when campaigns are going. Candidates and teams, they watch the every word of their opponents in hopes of catching an error or a statement that can be construed as extreme. Danielle Smith handed her political opponents a bombshell last week when she mused about cancer care while interviewing a naturopath during a podcast. So I'm going to quote exactly what Danielle Smith said. She said, "Once you've arrived and got stage 4 cancer and there's radiation and surgery and chemotherapy, those are incredibly expensive interventions, not just for the system, but also expensive in the toll it takes on the body. And I think about everything that built up before you got to stage 4 and that diagnosis that's completely within your control, and there's something that you can do about it that is different." Okay, now, out of all of those words, the offensive words were in that quote, completely within your control, as you can see highlighted in there. And it isn't surprising that it's upset a lot of people. I mean, pretty much everybody has had experiences with cancer, whether directly or with families and friends. It's a terrible, wasting disease, and it's an unfair one. Cancer takes children and seniors alike, and we've made great strides in treating it, but it's still by far one of our biggest killers out there. Now, Smith walked it back and tried to clarify the statement, but the damage has already been wrought. Her opponents and many in the press have, of course, been eagerly jumping on this and implying she was blaming cancer victims for their own conditions. Now, there's a lot of health and lifestyle choices we can make to reduce the chances of getting cancer. I mean, smoking, of course, is a big one, or reducing drinking, not getting too much direct sun exposure, or avoiding airborne pollutants and other things. Those choices, though, they only reduce the chances of getting cancer. They'll never eliminate them. I mean, non-smokers can get lung cancer too. Young women can get breast cancer, and children can get brain cancer. And there's not a thing that could have been done to avoid it. I'm giving the benefit of the doubt and assuming Smith meant to imply that efforts can be made to mitigate risk and aren't, as she said, completely within one's control. That's all it takes, though. One sentence uttered, whether intentionally or taken out of context, can destroy an entire discussion, or in this case, maybe a campaign. Danielle Smith's strength has been her inquiring interviews, where she verbally walks down the path of speculation, whether politically or even in areas like healthcare. She mentally meanders verbally, and it makes for an interesting listen. That was part of what made her such a popular talk radio host and allowed her to regain public support and respect after the Wild Rose party floor crossing debacle from years ago. Unfortunately, though, Smith's verbose style also creates a minefield for herself. The more words you utter, the better the chances you're going to inadvertently come out with something that's going to stir controversy you didn't want to. And it's not such a big problem when you're in media, though she did run afoul of her bosses a number of times while in talk radio. It's a huge problem, though, when running a major political campaign and you're surrounded by opponents who are going to exploit every possible error. Smith has explained herself repeatedly, and now there's little else she can do but hunker down and see if this one blows over. Time will tell just how damaging the statement may be for her political future. The other thing she's likely going to do, and this is unfortunate, is reduce the amount of time she spends freely speaking. She'll move into the more controlled mode and stick to talking points. And that's unfortunate because it's going to make her sound like every other candidate in the field. I know for me, it's painful when I interview candidates on the show and I can't get anything beyond their carefully scripted statements. I mean, I might as well just read their press releases verbatim and save myself the trouble of booking them. It's a safety tactic on their part, though, and I can see why they embrace it. I just don't have to like it. I do hope we don't see Smith shying away from being outspoken and examining new policy ideas in light of this mess. Her strength is in thinking outside of the box and being receptive to new ideas. That can also be a weakness, though, if it's not done with care. The campaign's still relatively in the early stages, and Smith came out of the gates hard, which made her the presumptive front runner. I'm not sure if she's maintaining that status right now. Now, I despise how so many politicians go into the nobody moves, nobody gets hurt mode of campaigns where they shy away from anything that could be considered controversial. In light of recent events, though, we can see why they do it. So we'll see what happens, but I'm afraid this is going to be a setback, in my view, for the campaign as a whole, because we're just not going to see as much candid, open speaking, not just on Smith's part, but on those, otherwise as well, and it's too bad. All right, let's see what else is going on out there and check in with our news editor, Dave Naylor. Hey, Dave, how's it going out there in the newsroom?
All right, Cory, I'm just wondering what the hell is wrong with you?
Oh, where do we begin now? What have I done this time?
Well,
is it that thing I left in the bathroom?
No, I was almost fine. But, Jane is obviously very upset with you that you missed the anniversary last week. And she's shown everybody, the way you stack dishes in the dishwasher. Now, that's really amateur, Cory. I mean, those two plates there, they're not going to get clean. I mean, what are you thinking?
I was obviously loading in a rush. And this is where our relationship has gotten to with both of us who take part in social media. And rather than bickering at home and having her correct me, she posts the pictures to publicly shame me. And then they get spread onto news broadcasts by news editors who dig through the Facebook feed, apparently. Hey, 3 out of 5 of those plates got clean. I think in terms of dishwashing, that was still a success when you measure it that way.
And now you're trying to put the blame on me. I'm trying to help you here, Cory. I'm trying to save you from getting into arguments with your wife. Just be careful in the future.
Well, I'll try and avoid it. She believes I do it on purpose, to try and get out of doing dishes. But no, I really am just that inept when I get things going, actually.
All right. And Jane, you keep telling me whenever he does wrong, and we'll make sure we highlight it for the viewers.
Great.
I got lots of stories on the go at the moment, Cory. Currently leading the site is reaction to Stephen Harper's endorsement last night of Pierre Poilievre as his person to win the conservative leadership race. Jean Charest has replied with well, Prime Minister Harper has made a personal choice, but even if you agree with him, you're still going to be welcome when I win the big prize. So Conservatives win when we're united, is what Charest says. There is a UCP poll out from Leger showing that Danielle Smith is currently in the lead with about 22%, if I remember the numbers if the figure is correctly. Brian Jean with 20%, and
Travis
come on,
Taves.
help me out here. Travis Taves with 15%. Everybody else might as well pack up their bags and go home. They're like 2% or less. 238 or 338 Canada, a polling group, is predicting that the UCP will win the next election. Says they've got enough seats for a majority victory, so that'll be interesting. And you remember those egregious bills that came to light probably last month, I think it was, Cory, when the Governor General and some friends went over to Dubai, and they were able to rack up a catering bill in the tens of thousands of dollars. Well, the Air Force has basically pushed the Governor General underneath the bus today, saying that all the expenses were on her. It was the Governor General who decided, and what they were all going to have. So we got that and a few other stories up there already. Cory, this afternoon promises to be a busy one. We've got Tamara Lich in Ottawa Court. This morning, a judge granted her a new bail hearing, so that's currently underway. And in granting that the bail hearing, he tore the Justice of the Peace a new one for his interpretation of the law. And I guess that was easy to do, Cory, because the Justice of the Peace wasn't even a lawyer. So why he's presiding over legal events is beyond me. We got lots more stories to come from Arthur Green and on the UCP race, and which candidates are promising to do what if they are elected. And we've got a story from Jonathan Bradley, who is in town for Toronto. He said he went to the Peace Bridge on the weekend and described it as quite magnificent. This was, of course, before all the vandalism. $1 million worth of vandalism from some idiot walking by, pushing a shopping cart, smashing out windows. Smashed out 70 panes, and that's going to cost more than $1 million to fix. And he also did the same thing previously. So the same guy obviously doesn't like the bridge, but you remember it, Cory, back at the time, it was hugely controversial. City Hall spending tens of millions of dollars on this bridge by a Spanish architect called Calatrava. But, now it's up. People seem to like it. And now it's costing us big bucks every year to fix it. So
yeah,
maybe like the LRT stations, the City Hall is going to shut it down.
I mean, I remember the bridge very well because I was very opposed to the construction of it. It was, $25 million of a Spanish architect. But, it's a sunk cost now. The Calgarians own it. There's no point vandalizing the bloody thing. It's not doing anybody any favors at this point. I mean, that's just crazy.
No, I mean, the guy looks obviously homeless. He's pushing a shopping cart. So I think we may be dealing with some mental issues here, Cory.
Yeah, well, hopefully they can resolve that before, closing it. As with the LRT stations, it seems the city goes for the simple answers of shutting things down rather than fixing them sometimes.
Indeed, they do.
All right, thanks, Dave. I'll talk to you after the show.
Thanks, Cory.
So that is our news editor, Dave Naylor. Lots on the go, lots of stories breaking, so make sure, take out a membership. I mean, you'll get on there, you'll check those stories, and you'll see, yes, indeed, there is a paywall. That means, and there's a free trial, so you can see what's behind it without risk. But you got to get out and take out a membership. The reason we got all these reporters that we're covering these stories, that we got these columns, and of course that we're doing this show, is because you guys have stepped up and subscribed, thousands of you, and it's been great. Obviously, people want an independent media source, and that's what we are. We don't take tax dollars, and we're not asking for charity. We're providing a service. $99 a year, $10 a month. Again, less than an old newspaper subscription used to cost, and you can get everything as we put it up there without hindrance. And of course, it supports us, which we appreciate. So if you've subscribed already, thank you. If you haven't yet, get on there, guys. Spend $10. It's worth it for you and us. And we can keep expanding and pushing that rotten legacy media to the wayside where they belong. And I see some of these viewers coming in. Bruce Clark from out in New Brunswick. Jet Gordon out on the other side of New Westminster. We've got people, Rhonda up in Fort St. John. I just love seeing people viewing from all across the country. It's good. I got spanked when I took kind of a cheap shot at Maritimers one time, and a couple of Maritime viewers got on there and gave me a good spanking on there in the comment scroll for having done so, reminding me that, yeah, we got people listening across the country here in this, and they appreciate this thing. And it's just good to see it out there. And having those commenters take me to task when I need it. Sometimes when I don't need it, in my view, we can argue. That's fine. And yes, we are really getting out there. Jackie Burden saying, what's going on with the police commissioner, Brenda Lucky? Yeah, you know what? Probably nothing. Lots of, discussion, things like that going on out there about whether or not the Trudeau government was pushing or interfering in the investigation into the largest mass shooting in Canadian history. Looks pretty likely that it probably did happen, but they'll just talk in circles and nothing really will happen. What's that? Yasha saying the Peace Bridge was a huge waste of taxpayers' funds. Absolutely it was. It was, like I said, $25 million. Nobody wanted it. It wasn't even originally called the Peace Bridge. It was just called a Calatrava Bridge because all these hipsters and everybody were all excited that this Spanish architect Calatrava was going to build it, but they had so much public pushback. That's part of what they did was they relabeled it. Well, this is in honor of our veterans, and we're going to call it the Peace Bridge because it stands for peace and going against war. And it was never anything the public wanted. But again, now that it's there, there's no sense costing taxpayers another million or more a year by smashing the damn windows out of it all the time. So I've been watching it online, and we've got Lemon Lucy. Can we stop calling them the legacy media? How about calling them the woke media? Yeah, I mean, there's a number of terms, or mainstream or legacy anyways, and I know a lot of them within there are woke, but the main part is we're not them. That's the main thing. Remember, we're not them. So keep watching our site, though. Tamara Lich is getting a new bail hearing, and I've been watching that, before the show and seeing what's going on, some of those discussions, and it's crazy. I mean, this is a person on mischief charges who is been in well over a month of time in jail with, mischief charges because they keep refusing her bail. And we're listening to clowns. Oh, she broke the law. She should be. It's mischief, you clowns. Bail. I mean, you got to remember, until she's guilty, she hasn't even been found guilty. She hasn't gone to trial yet. If you're going to hold somebody without bail, you've got to prove, are they presenting a threat to society or are they a flight risk? And there's clearly neither is the case. And what has happened, as Dave mentioned, is a justice of the peace, because that's what often happens in quick hearings and so on. They use a justice of the peace, not a full-out judge. This justice of the peace isn't even a lawyer. This is a bureaucrat who got appointed to that role. And the judge today, when it was reviewing this, looked at it and just basically ripped into the JP and said, you don't understand the law. He was kind of polite about it, saying, in sort of a backhanded way, I'm paraphrasing, but along the lines of saying, we understand you didn't have the full legal training, perhaps, that are required to properly address this. And he's called for an immediate bail hearing. Like saying, that's it. We're going into it right now. So today, and by the tone of that, it sounds to me like this judge is going to say enough is enough. Let this grandmother go. She can stay home until we get to trial. And I mean, you got to remember, being in the buckets, like being in holding on the way to trial. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe every day you serve in there, typically in the Canadian system, counts as 3 days towards your sentence if you get sentenced later. Because it's so bad. The conditions are not good in holding. It's not like a long-term setting where prison, which I imagine isn't a very pleasant place to spend time either, but at least in a prison, you're settled in, you can do some things, education, recreation, whatever. In the holding areas, no, it's just you're held. There's not much to do. It's a harsher punishment than being in prison. There's pretty much no way she's going to be settled, even if she gets found guilty and sentenced, that she would be sentenced to serve the amount of days that she's already put in just awaiting trial. And again, people, this is over mischief. And we report constantly at the Western Standard pointing out, I mean, there's some horrible cases, sex offenders, dangerous people out there who are getting released on bail all the time. And we're holding Tamara Lich in there. We're taking up the judge's time, the justice of the peace time. And some people saying, you don't understand. The government's not influencing this. It's the justice system itself. It's fine. Bull. Just bull. Quit feeding me that. When do you ever see a mischief case get this kind of prosecution? And I mean, this justice of the peace, if he wants to win brownie points, he was just a bureaucrat, as I said, brownie points with the Liberals. What do you think he's going to do? This prosecutor who's obsessed with going after Lich. This is a guy who probably wants to get himself a nice, juicy promotion. This is how you become a judge, right? This is how you get up there in the bench, because guess who appoints you to those very high levels in there? Yes, Justin Trudeau does it. So don't try and tell me it's not influencing how these guys are behaving in that courtroom and how they're addressing Tamara Lich's case? Of course it is. And perhaps there's not, direct orders coming down saying crack down on this person, but they bloody well know that the higher ups in the Justice Department and in the Liberal government want an example made out of Tamara Lich, and they're pulling out all the stops to try and get her. And it's embarrassing. Frank Boucher, yeah. Hey, Frankie. Saying, yeah, holding cells are the most dangerous. Know a few people who serve time. And Etta Rumi's father's a corrections officer. Yeah, it's a transitional place. It's not where you're supposed to be for a long time. And I mean, again, look at the resources. I mean, it's insane. When we look back on this historically, even looking now, we can see how ludicrous this is. But they flew multiple homicide detectives all the way out here to grab her from Medicine Hat and then fly her all the way back to Ottawa to shove her in jail. The expense, the effort, the time. And again, this is time that these homicide detectives, I imagine, aren't investigating homicides. This is time right now when this justice, this real justice now, is spending in court determining whether or not to let her go again on her own until court time. All of these resources, total waste of time, vindictiveness, and spite. I've said it before and I've said it again. People say it's hyperbole. It's not. She's a political prisoner. She's not in there for mischief because people don't do time like that for mischief. She's in there because she embarrassed the government, or at least she was a part of a whole bunch of people that embarrassed the government. And they want to stop it. Somebody else pointed out as well, I mean, we've been talking about that with, the government's got some bigger protests coming probably. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, they're looking to go into the same fertilizer type bans and things like that the Dutch government did, that the Sri Lankan government did. The Sri Lankan government got overthrown because of the fertilizer bans that they did. The Dutch, the Netherlands have been overrun with protests and tractors and things blocking roads for weeks and weeks now. They're in serious trouble because of the fertilizer bans. And Prime Minister Ding Dong in Canada still wants to impose a 30% reduction on farmers. They haven't said how yet. Somebody did point out, if you look up Quick Dick McDick, he did a fantastic video on it. We've had him on here occasionally. He's he phrases it well in an entertaining way. And of course, he knows, a world's more about farming than I do. He is a farmer and a very smart guy. And he lays out what the whole thing is. I mean, they aren't banning or forcing the reduction of it yet, but that they're setting the goal at it. And part of what he pointed out too is farmers, just due to the costs, fertilizer is expensive, they've been cutting it. And it's just like the oil field. Did they get any credit for it though? No. So they've already reduced it just for the sake of efficiency. I mean, they're not going to waste it. It's expensive. And the Prime Minister says it wants to, force it to cut more. What's this about Snopes? Check Snopes says what's not true. Sorry, I'm just looking at the comments and I'm not sure what that one's about. Either way, there's lots of things going around out there. And yeah, Quick McDick's a good one on that. But what I'm saying is, I think this government even knows that the harder times are yet to come. And they're going to be a lot harder. And people are going to protest again. So they want to make sure to say, hey, if you're thinking of protesting, if you're thinking of pushing back on this, this is what we're going to do to you. We're going to take you like we did with Tamara Lich, and we're going to seize your funds. We're going to demonize you. We're going to throw you in jail for indefinite periods of time without bail, impose ridiculous bail conditions upon you. I mean, you see, some people saying, well, technically, she shouldn't have spoken to that guy who was writing her bail conditions, because that's what it was all about. She paused for a moment, posed for a picture with a person who was another organizer, and within her bail conditions, she was not supposed to be with that person. This is why you have judges. You don't look at it just straight to the letter of what it's about. You have to reason with it. Was this such an egregious offense, such an egregious, even if it was a violation of bail, that it warranted flying her across the country and throwing her back in jail? Come on. I mean, at the most, that's where you would say, we're going to give you a warning, cut it out, don't stretch it. These rules are here, but don't try to push the edges. Or you could find yourself back in. But to yank her across the nation like this over such a minor thing. Now, on the other end of it, some people have said, well, she was allowed to because she had her lawyers present. Okay, you see, just to show a little bit of both sides here, I mean, I think the requirements were just too overwhelming and odious, but all the same, she wasn't supposed to be seen with that guy, that fellow she paused with. unless she was with lawyers. The reason they allow it with lawyers is because if they were going to be doing something for the defense or things like that in this official meeting, they can allow the interaction in that setting. Just because the lawyers were in the same room at an awards ceremony, that's also kind of abusing the spirit of what the restriction was supposed to be about. That was kind of a bit of pushing the limits on what you're supposed to be allowed. Again, I think the restriction was unreasonable, but you're not doing yourself any favors when you push the edges to see how much you can get away with either. I don't think for a second, though, that was purposeful on her part. Somebody said Tom Marazzo is his name. Thank you, Cindy. And, I don't think it was purposeful on her part. She certainly would have done it if she thought it was going to get her flown across the country and thrown in jail again. But you do have to take some pretty extra care, especially when you have a government that's so clearly eager to throw you in jail and keep you there. Mr. Rubenstein seems to be delayed, and I'm not sure why, but I'm just going to, bear with me. I'm going to send him a quick email just to see what's up, because I know I spoke with him earlier. Yeah. As I was saying earlier, the challenges of being live, we get all sorts of hang-ups now and then, but it does make for a better interactive show. But when these guests are late with me, it kills me because I got to ramble aimlessly for periods of time to fill the void. All the same. Okay, here's some, let's look into something kind of positive. In a country that's at least not, led by somebody who's not a complete imbecile or ideological lunatic like Canada's, Australia. So we got Anthony Albanese saying Labour will not support a moratorium on fossil fuel projects because to do so would have a devastating impact on the Australian economy. And this is a Labour leader. This is the left. This is their version of liberal. They realize the realities of fossil fuel moratoriums. They say, we can't do this. We can't pay the bills with this. There's the introduction on Wednesday enshrining the Labour's 2030 to 2050 reduction targets. And he told them that the moratorium was a policy of the Greens. So even Labour is dodging away from it. And they're saying, no, we can't do this. It's not in our policy. We won't be implementing it. We won't be supporting it. Why can't we figure that out here? And it's funny because, he's saying it's not going to have an impact realistically to the climate. I mean, that's the thing. That's supposedly the goal of all this, right? Australia is not a big enough player for it, and it's just going to hurt them. And he's even talking about coal and things such as that. We've got to understand this. This gets to the fertilizer and all of this emissions obsession, all of it. I'm not going to go into whether or not climate change is real, whether or not we're causing it or all that stuff. It's fine. But what I do want to point out is that these initiatives to get rid of things won't work until they come up with an alternative. And right now, there is not an alternative for those types of fertilizers we use that are keeping world famine from happening. You can't ban something until you can point somewhere else to let people go to. I mean, people say, what, you're going to go to organic fertilizer, save your poo, compost your lawn clippings. Hey, that's great around the household, guys. It's not going to work in a commercial farm field. And you got to have those larger fertilizers. The amount of yield per acre has gone up 500% in the last 80 years around the world with modern farming, and that's because of fertilizer. And if you cut that by 30%, 50%, 100%, or as they found in Sri Lanka when they banned it and said, we're going to go organic, oh, good work. You get riots, you get starvation. You got to come up with the alternative. If you stop these chemical fertilizers, what the hell are they supposed to go with? If we stop with oil and gas, what are we supposed to go with? We've exposed that you guys don't have an option for us. Wind doesn't work. It won't fill the void. Solar, again, same thing. It's sporadic, it's expensive, and doesn't generate nearly enough power. We can't do it. So we have to get realistic with these things. And this is where we cause disruptions. This is where ideology is trumping reality. And we've got to push back. So as somebody else was saying, this Labour leader is he's fairly useless, but he knows he won't be in for long if he doesn't reject the green agenda. And that's fine. Again, if even a Labour leader, though, can realize it, they understand that. Trudeau doesn't realize that. And I think it will cost them, but it's going to cost us a lot first in pain. So I'm going to pop Melanie Risden in because, it's a good time to point out, since Mr. Rubenstein seems to be delayed, And Melanie's got something to share. She's been working on a series, actually, 7-part series, and it's starting today. COVID Freedom Heroes. So let's pull her in and have a quick discussion here while we wait for Mr. Rubenstein, and let's make good use of this time. Hey, Mel, thanks for coming in to talk to us.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I thought we could just chat a little bit about the 7-part series that the Western Standard is going to launch as of today, actually. It's called COVID Freedom Heroes, and we are featuring 7 different groups or people who were, sort of heavy behind the scenes working to fight for people's right to gather and worship, their right to travel, their right to bodily autonomy, things like that. So 7-part series coming up, and we're launching tonight, featuring the very first hero, which we've labeled the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms.
Great, yeah, and the JCCF, well, I mean, them and their lawyers, John Carpe and Jay and a lot of the others, I mean, they've been front and center throughout this entire thing on a number of things, whether it's religious freedoms, free choice in medical treatment and things such as that. So that'll be a good one to kick it off with for sure.
Yeah, and then we've got, of course, as mentioned, 7-part series. So we'll have more following that. We're going to do another series on Thursday. We're launching all of these for a watch live at 7 o'clock. But of course, you can find them on our social channels and as well on our website after the fact as well. And on Thursday, we are going to feature Free to Fly, which was co-founded by 2 Canadian pilots to help support other aviation professionals, as well as the thousands of travelers that were affected by the travel restrictions announced by the federal government across Canada, and limiting travel for Canadians who are unvaccinated.
Yeah, well, I mean, lots to look forward to, and those are subjects you've been covering, of course, quite a while, and you've had a number of interviews. So seeing it in a full series like this will be a really good way to get in all those different levels of the people pushing back on this right now.
Well, and the other thing that I think is great about this too is that all of the coverage that we have done throughout the pandemic, we are going to include in these features with sort of click-throughs to stories and coverage that we did for the different COVID Freedom Heroes that we're featuring. So for people who've just joined us here at the Western Standard, it will sort of be a nice way of compiling things that have transpired and our coverage of it. And so, it's just a great option for people to really get a feel for what kind of coverage we've done throughout the last kind of 2 years. And then, of course, next week we're going to be featuring or highlighting the faith community, the faith community led by Pastor Coates from Grace Life Church, and sort of that fight to the right to gather and worship. And sort of not live in fear. And then we also will be featuring next week Chris Scott from Whistle Stop Cafe. So we're going to touch base with him, and all of these do have a watch portion as well. So we're going to be interviewing these people and catching up with them, just sort of recapping some of the things that they experienced throughout their ordeal through the pandemic, and just finding out where they're at now and what's happening with them and what their hopes are.
Well, excellent. Sounds like great work. So before I let you go, just to remind everybody, when are they going to catch them and where?
Well, so we are going to launch tonight with the JCCF, Justice Center, and Thursday we will be featuring Free to Fly, and then we will have another set next week. But don't worry, we're going to have lots of sort of promotion where people can find them and when they can watch.
Excellent. It sounds like our commenters are excited and looking forward to it. Thanks for coming in to remind us that it's all coming out, Melanie. I'm looking forward to seeing them.
Absolutely.
Great, thanks. So that's Melanie Riston, who's been hard at work on that series. I've been watching, actually. I see her coming and going from the studio, but we're also busy here. I knew she's been doing all these interviews. I was wondering what that was all going to come together to. I knew this was happening, but it's good to see the culmination of all that work. Okay, so he's a little delayed, but we've got him now. Let's bring Hymie in and discuss some of the stuff that I've been looking forward to. And that's with the Pope's visit in the Indian residential schools, and boy, all sorts of stuff we've been talking about over this last couple of months, actually. So hello, Hymie. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm getting a lot of background noise. Somehow there's a poor connection, but I'll try my best.
Okay, that's unfortunate. Yes, you're sounding good and clear to us anyhow. So, I mean, the Indian residential schools has been an issue, as you've been writing a lot in your newsletter and in the Dorchester Times, as well, with columns here in the Western Standard occasionally. And it's going to be in the news scroll quite a bit right now, as we have the Pope Francis visiting right now and making a number of apologies for the Indian residential schools. What's your interpretation on how is this visit going to help towards reconciliation?
I doubt it, because the end game is not reconciliation. It's never been about reconciliation. We would have had reconciliation decades ago if that was the ultimate goal. Even the Pope admitted in his speech, in his apology, that there's still a long way to go. He said, we're at the beginning. Everybody's, first step. He said, this is the first step. My apology today. It's always a first step. There's never a second step. I wonder why.
Well, and that's part of what I've seen, some reactions too, though, with people, even if the Pope legitimately wants to end this, it's never enough. I mean, people are already saying, yeah, it is the first step, but when does this ever end? And there just doesn't seem to be any resolution. We just keep reopening an old wound.
I didn't catch the last part. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm going to adjust my microphone here, my earphones, I mean, see if that helps. Sorry for that.
Oh, that's okay. If you're hearing me a little better now.
Look, this is only one. There have been dozens of these apologies within the Catholic Church and in other faiths for many years now, but we're still at a stage where we do not have the basis for the apology, namely the factual basis. The Pope himself admitted that in when he said more research has to be done. Why did he say that? Yet his apology accepted all of the accusations made in the 6 volumes of the Truth and Reconciliation Report of 2015, including accusations directly, indirectly, and in his address about children being forced to attend the schools. 150,000 children were forced to attend Indian residential schools. There is no evidence of that. The evidence is on the other side, that most of the children who attended voluntarily, based on both the law and on the will of their parents. There was a 28-year period between 1920 and 1948. It's probably a 24-year period when Indian residential school attendance was mandatory if and only if there was no day school, Indian day school on the particular reserve. And in fact, over the entire period of the Indian residential schools, only a third of actual children attended these schools at most. Through the entire 113-year period of the Indian residential schools, most children either attended day schools or no school at all. And even up to 1940, something like 40% of Indigenous children were attending no school at all. That is the tragedy, Cory.
Yeah, and then when you see broad-based apologies, though, and if we aren't even sure exactly what it's for, it kind of opens one up for a lot more follow-up and liability, unfortunately, though. Like, any lawyer will advise you often, I'm afraid, if something wrong has happened, if you're worried about liability, the first thing, don't apologize yet. As soon as you apologize, you're admitting guilt. And that's what I'm saying is we're hearing activists, we're hearing others saying, okay, this is just the beginning, that they're going to be coming after the Catholic Church for more than an apology soon.
There's a big disappointment this morning, and it was since April, the April first apology, about reparations not being part of the apology. Apologies are something, but they're not enough. What are you going to do to compensate for all the damage that was done to the children at these residential schools that you are responsible for. The underlying assumption, of course, was that there was horrible damage done to each and every student who attended the residential schools. I am the last person who will deny that some students were damaged at the schools, that some teachers were brutal, that some sexual abuse, I'm not going to deny that some sexual abuse occurred to some children at some schools during certain periods. Many of those individuals involved have been punished. Most of them were not clerical personnel. They were other workers in the school. The bulk of the sexual abuse that took place between students, as occurs in residential schools all over the world throughout human history. So, when you start off with the assumption that there was all this damage and you're not giving the proof of this damage, and you're saying, well, there's this legacy, even among people who never went to a residential school, in communities where nobody went to a residential schools, which as much as Eastern Canada, there's only one Indian residential school, yet all of the same pathologies that we see among Indigenous people, high crime, high unemployment, high suicide, et cetera, high poverty, occurs at the same rate in these other places.
Yeah, and I worry that, unfortunately, even if some of it might be well-meaning and so on, I mean, when we get, again, to not getting any closer to any closure, I've been watching the coverage of it, it's been going around the clock, and I see the language and the uncorrected language of activists and others who refer to every one of them as a survivor. Even if you went to a day school, you're called a survivor, as if you'd endured something beyond what anybody else going to school does, as if somebody was trying to kill you. Or constantly, and I had that in my opening monologue yesterday, the word genocide keeps putting out there, and there was no bloody genocide. But the more we keep driving that in through the news and with these apologies, the more people get that misconception that this all happened.
What I find particularly interesting about the Pope's apology is it's diametrically opposite to what Pope John Paul II said when he visited Canada in 1985. Let me just read two sentences here. He went to, 1987. He stopped at Fort Simpson in the Northwest Territories on a particular First Nations reserve. And this is what he said about the Catholic missionaries, the teachers in the schools. The revival of your Indigenous culture and traditions that you know today is largely due to the initiatives and continuous efforts of the missionaries. Your ancestors knew by instinct that the gospel, far from destroying their authentic values and customs, had the power to purify and uplift the cultural heritage which they had received. So, Cory, what happened over the 30 years? Why is this turnaround, when it's all based on the same historical evidence, which suggests that John Paul II was quite right, that students were often instructed by priests who had learned their Indigenous language and often spoke it to them in their Indigenous language, whether it was Cree or Ojibwe or whatever, outside the classroom. Inside the classroom, just as in French immersion in Canada, you've got to stick to the syllabus. And the syllabus says it's, you're learning English, you're learning French. But outside the classroom and on events and excursions and so on, Indigenous people were allowed to speak their languages and allowed to practice their cultural activities, which the missionaries took great zeal in recording and supporting in many cases. And I'm saying there weren't some rotten apples, but the few rotten apples cannot be taken as representative of the entire barrel.
Yeah, so, I mean, where do we go with this, though? I mean, this tour is going to go ahead, and there's going to be more people looking for more compensation. Getting back to more of the interviews, as I've done with, Brian Giesbrecht and Clifton and others, and I want to keep on this. Are we ever going to finally investigate and get the facts on this, though? I mean, there doesn't seem to be will on the part of legacy media. A little bit happened with the National Post and Terry Glavin. But, people just say the mythology is overtaking the reality, and I'm not sure if we could stop it.
It's an uphill road. Slowly but surely, some of the data is coming out. It's all there. It's all in the archives. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission did a very sloppy job in collecting the data. They did a very sloppy job in even trying to get a representative sample of the tens of thousands of students who are still alive. They let any student come to these testimonials and to these hearings who had, most of them had a grievance that they wanted to reveal. So we're slowly getting to know that. And we're slowly getting to realize that there are no missing children. This is something that many people are now working on. We're finding them in the archives and data that were ignored by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. How can you say there's a missing child when the child was recorded as dead? The child is just dead. The child is not missing.
Yeah, and you'd corrected me on that before. I the very first time we had you on the show, because I was under this misconception that, well, there was poor record keeping and we don't know who was where and whatnot. And no, the records were actually very meticulous. We knew the disposition of pretty much every child, whether they died or went back home or whatever happened with them. But again, a lot of us are under this misinformation that children have vanished, and they haven't. There's nobody looking for them because there's none disappeared.
If thousands of students were missing, you would have thousands of families looking for them by name of child, by the name of the individuals who are looking for them. You would have countless police reports. There would have been investigations years ago. It's simply false.
Well,
buried in unmarked graves. What are unmarked graves? You go to any cemetery in Winnipeg, you're going to find unmarked graves, or in Calgary from the 19th century, because poor people did not have money to get a headstone. They put in a wooden cross, which disintegrated within 20 or 30 years.
Oh, yeah. At the Calgary Union Cemetery, if you go to the south side, you see a big wide open area where you just see some surface ground disturbances, and that was what used to be called the Potter's Field, because there was a wooden cross put in for transient individuals or people who were poor, and all visible record of it disappeared. It's not uncommon at all for old cemeteries.
Absolutely, and we have those all over the country for all sorts of groups, not just Indigenous individuals. When students died at a school, and many died as students in a school, they were normally not buried in the cemetery adjacent to the school, which was largely for school personnel, the nuns, the priests, the workers. They've come from thousands of miles away, so there was no way to send them home after they died, so they had their own cemetery. Very few students were buried in those cemeteries. The vast majority of them, when they became ill, they were either sent to a nearby hospital, to a dedicated Indigenous hospital, or back to their home community. When they died in their home community, they were buried in their home cemeteries.
Yeah,
this is in the historical record. This is not a hypothesis on my part.
No, and I appreciate your ongoing work with this. So, before I let you go, and I'm certain we'll be talking again, because this subject just keeps going. And as I've been writing columns as well and pushing, we need to investigate. We need to look into what really happened in Kamloops. We got to get the facts out there. Where can we find your work? I know you have a newsletter and you've put stuff in the Dorchester Review. Where can people track that down?
My newsletter is on Substack, and the address is simply hymie.substack.com.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you carrying on with this and speaking up, and I'll keep on it too, and eventually we'll find some resolution one way or another on this issue.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that was Mr. Hymie Rubenstein. He's a retired professor of anthropology in Manitoba, and he's put a lot of work on this, and he's worked with others. There's been a lot of documentation. The bottom line is we just want to get to the bottom of it. Nobody's denying that wrongdoing happen, not for a second. It's just that we're allowing this to just keep snowballing and growing and getting into a mythology that's not helping anybody heal. It's not putting anybody into a better position. Isn't that what we want in the end? To just finally get to a point of saying this was a period in history. We've resolved it. We've settled it. It was dark, and we're finished with it. I mean, I know there's conspiracy kooks like Burnt Offerings who thinks the Freemasons are the one who hid all this. Well, you're welcome to do that. I'm pretty sure that it wasn't the Freemasons, actually. It could very well have been the aliens and the lizard people, but we will see. But for the time being, the evidence we do have is available in church records and archives, and as well, hopefully, with what I would like to see is a forensic excavation and looking into these sites where these anomalies have been found and seeing just what happened. And again, it's just as I said the other day, if they dig up a bunch of children's bodies and it appears that they were hidden and that they were murdered or abused, well, let's get on with it. Let's find out. There could be people living who took part in that. There could be people who actually did this. And sorry, I'm not laughing at something so serious. I'm just looking at the commenter, Bird Offer, saying, ad hominem attacks show that you are a Mason scum. Yes, you're right. I got that little tattoo on my ass, actually, with the hammer and all that stuff. Me and Homer Simpson with the Stonehenge. All right, that's enough of you kooks. Let's go on to a more local kook. And that is our own Myke Thomas.
How are you, Cory?
Good, good. We've got Myke in studio. And yeah, busy times, lots of stuff to come.
A lot of stuff going on. Yeah, for sure.
I guess I want to start though. I mean, real estate's your turf. You've putting out some of those, homes to die for, those incredible giant.
It's Nabi invented the term real estate porn, and really that's what it is. You know, a chance to sneak inside and look inside the big expensive houses that otherwise you're not going to get anywhere near. I don't understand them. I really don't understand them. I guess if you got that kind of money, you got to spend it on something. But if I had that kind of money, I'd be doing other stuff with it.
Yeah, I mean, to each their own. I mean, if I want all those lottery things, I don't think I'd need some 20,000 square foot house. I mean, maybe I'd stay in some luxury hotels while I travel the world and get my foot massages.
Buy a beachfront in Hawaii.
Yeah, but
see,
but there's some amazing places out there.
But you know, it is interesting looking at them and looking at how people decorate them, because I mean, obviously they're all custom done, and how they furnish them. There's like you can almost tell the age of the people who own the house because of the furniture. You know, you got the old big stuffed sofas and stuff like that. Well, that's an older couple.
Yeah.
Then you got well, there's a younger guy. So it's interesting.
Well, it's like us with music. I think, everywhere you hit a certain point in age where you just kind of lock on to a style and a trend, and we stick with it. So we're never going to see, us more elderly getting on there, doing well with the hip new styles or anything. We stick to our older stuff.
But yeah, it is amazing what people will do to their houses.
So what were some of the prices on some of those ones you put?
The most expensive one, I think, in Montreal was $39 million.
$9 million for a house.
The most expensive one in Alberta was $12 million, up in Canmore. And it's I'm reasonably familiar with the house in so much as that years ago when they opened the Three Sisters Village up there. We went on a big tour of all the houses, but it looks totally different than it did back then.
I can imagine the property taxes and maintenance.
Oh, it's huge. I mean,
it's not just that purchase price you're dealing with.
No, a lot of the houses come listed with what your down payment's going to be. The down payment is more than most people spend on a house in our life or in the world we live in. So and then the taxes are running, I don't know, $2,500, $3,000, $4,000 a month. So I have no idea how you could manage that. It just escapes me.
No, I mean, there's just people that are at a level of wealth that we just can't imagine, really.
No. And I don't even know if I'd want to be. I'd rather have the same amount of money as you've got.
Oh, well, that's a modest amount. I mean, set your bar somewhere where it can be accomplished, and you've got it. I'm not starving, but Jane and I aren't in the market for any monster places in the near future. No. But and here's your most recent one. I mean, this is what people have been I've been hearing on the news talking about, though, and a lot of people are sweating right now. It sounds like the bubble could be popping in the real estate.
I hate that phrase.
Okay, well.
I hate that phrase. For the bubble to pop means that every housing market across the country has to implode. The the bubble burst in the United States in 2008. That was the sign of that's a bubble bursting.
Yeah, and that was government intervention made a mess. And
well, it was lack of government intervention, if the truth be told, because what they were doing down there in 08 and prior to that is they were the mortgage companies, and it's a whole different set of rules down there than what we have, but they were giving mortgages to people who
never should have had them.
Should never have had them. And then what they did is they bundled them up. So what these small guys do is they say they'd put 50 mortgages into a bag, basically, take them to the big financial companies. The mortgages in that bag were not all good, but they had a value because each mortgage obviously has a value. So what happens is you got a bag full of mortgages that are worth $5 million, pick a number, that they're selling to the big guys for $3 million. So they're thinking this is a good deal, but they were all bad mortgages. And that's why those big guys went down.
Well, I did a bunch of American work after that, and I was working in the Northeast a lot in Pennsylvania. And I remember doing a job in Bradford, and there was this was around 2008, 2009, just after the crash, and there was this mansion. It had to be 8,000 square feet, Victorian brick, beautiful, on probably an acre. You're asking 90,000.
Yeah.
They were begging people just to take it off their hands. I mean, it would have been a $5 million home in Calgary, and they were just trying to get out of this.
The bubble that burst in the States, I mean, that became a self-fulfilling prophecy in Canada, because you watch that when, oh boy, we're all in trouble. There's panic, sell the house quick. So now the number of homes for sale, they're all over the place. The selection is huge. So in order to sell your house, you got to bring your price down below the guy next door. Otherwise, you're not going to sell it. So that's what everybody did.
Yeah,
not everybody.
The stress test came along after that to make
after
sure.
that, and that's right. Which is the stress test. When it initially came out, I kind of went, well, I don't know if we need that. And now, in retrospect, absolutely, that could save us. Right now, the stress test. Well, it used to be whatever mortgage rate you got plus 2% or 5.25%, whichever was higher that you had to qualify at. That qualification is now up around 6%. And with the Bank of Canada probably going to hit it up again 50, 75 in points in September, it'll go even higher. So that's pulling activity out of the market. So to say that people aren't necessarily in a panic to sell because of that stress test, they had to be able to prove they could make the payments at 6.5% or 5.25%. Otherwise, no mortgage. And that's federal regulations.
Because a panic sale is what could really cause a bad domino effect.
Absolutely.
And really.
And that's what happened in Canada. Not everywhere. Canada recovered from that a whole lot quicker than the United States did. And that had a lot to do with Stephen Harper, who's back in the news. But there's so many pieces to this puzzle.
Well, and there's multiple markets. I mean, the real superheated ones we always hear about are in Vancouver and Toronto.
The Golden Horseshoe in the Lower Mainland and Victoria in BC will be hit the hardest. Or I should want to say
correct. I guess is the word you were using.
Yes,
before.
correct.
Yeah, so.
But only because they were so hot and the prices were driven up so high. So if there's going to be a 23% reduction in sales, which is what the economists are forecasting today, 23% value in Toronto is a whole lot more money than it is in Calgary. So that's what people will look at. The other thing to keep in mind right now, with our sales down, yes. Prices are down, yes, across the board. But it's a slow season. The spring season ended probably in the middle of June. In Calgary, I looked at the numbers today. They're down from June, but they're up year over year. And that's very important. People should not be comparing going from year over year. Just what was it last year? What was it last month? Because that's where you see the trend coming in. Calgary, I think, from what I can be told, and Edmonton, Regina, Manitoba I guess that's a province, Winnipeg, are not going to be hit as hard. They will probably come through this a lot cleaner. And when I say through this, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like.
We got a pretty good idea. It sounds like we got more interest rate hikes coming down.
Oh, definitely. The Bank of Canada wants their rate to be at least 3.25% by October. The next rate announcement is in September, on the 7th of September, and then there's 2 more after that. So in order to get it to 3.25 from where it is now, they have to raise it 75 basis points. They'll either do it all at once in September and then rest and see how things are going, or they'll do it incrementally in the last 3 announcements.
And those rises, I mean, they can have a very significant impact depending on how much balance you're carrying on your mortgage if you renew. I mean, I know we just renewed recently, not extremely, but fairly, and it still hit us with basically we're up for a few $100 a month, but we're lucky, at least for the next 5 years, we're in an affordable spot. But if we had to renew by December, that could be a terrible hit we'd be taking.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to more than just housing and people buying and selling it. I mean, we're headed into a recession. There's no question about that. I think we're in one now. There's a big argument in the United States about how you define that, but we are in one. How deep and severe that will be, I don't know. Nothing like 2008, I don't believe. So it comes down to employment. If a lot of people lose their jobs because of the recession, then their mortgages are in jeopardy.
Well, then we see defaults, and that's a whole.
And you'll see defaults. You're going to see some defaults anyway. But again, nobody wants that to happen, but it's only natural. I mean, the housing market in Canada, all the markets in Canada, were so hot, so rapid, it had to come down at some point in time.
Yeah, well, and I see it just from a question. I mean, it all ties together anyways. And Pamela Jones-Kenny asking for you, just saying, what happens to all the outrageous rent that's being charged to a lot of renters in BC? I know my daughter's got to go back to university this fall in Vancouver, and she's having a help. She can't even find a spot, much less afford one. So, would it trickle down at least to give some relief there?
I just about said a really stupid thing. I was going to say that's the government's problem, but it's not. It's a supply issue, and the rents are going to go up anyway, because we've got 500,000 people moving to Canada every year, most of them to Toronto and Vancouver. We'll get some here, and they've got to have some place to live. So it comes down to supply. The government should get out of it. They come up with all these programs that are nothing more than bureaucratic nightmares. They spend more money hiring bureaucrats than they do on building apartments. They need to go sit down with the Canadian Home Builders Association or just travel around to each city and say, look, to the builders, look, here's $100 million, which to the government's nothing. Here's $100 million, go build some apartments.
Or just even get out of the damn way. Like, I've had Shane Wenzel on a couple of times, and he's good and he's outspoken. And I mean, the ridiculousness in Calgary is far from alone with it. It's 8 years from proposal to construction on an area. And I mean, the investment and long-term thinking involved, and that's assuming you get approved. You could get stopped any step along the way with a new development. Nobody wants to invest, and or at least they're investing because they have to, but it's reducing the pool. And meanwhile, I look at discussions online, though. I mean, City Hall, the hipsters and everybody are still screaming, no more development, no more development. I mean, they're only going to make it worse.
That's like being part of a clique.
I know.
Let's run around and be stupid.
But the clique is running the city. That's the
Unfortunately,
problem.
that is true, yeah. But the other thing, I mean, in terms of the type of housing that's required, which is multifamily apartments, not the towers they're talking about downtown Calgary, that doesn't work. One of the things that gets in the way is the money from the banks, because a builder has to sell, I think, 50% of the building before the bank will say, here's your money, go build it. So that takes a while. But if the government, instead of coming up with these horse's ass programs that they do, just took the cash and said, here's Shane Wenzel, go build some apartments. Shane would be out there building them right now.
The dirt be moving the week afterwards,
yeah.
And it would put some people to work and take some inflationary pressure off.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't want to see government throwing money out. That's a separate discussion, but it'd be better than what they're wasting it on. I mean, $87 billion climate plan in Calgary.
Which is never, I mean, that's just virtue signaling.
Pie in the sky crap, but they'll spend a lot of money trying.
Of course, well, they already have.
Yeah.
But you said the government throwing money away. I agree with that. But if the government gave them money and got out of their way in terms of development permits and crap like that, it's not throwing it away. It's providing cheap accommodations for people in BC and well across the country in places where it's needed because you can target it. Supply is still an issue, big time issue all across the country, regardless of the fact that sales are going to slow down and the demand is going to weaken. Supply is still a major problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not something that changes quickly. I mean, even if suddenly the government woke up, cut a bunch of the red tape out of the way, and yeah, threw some money out, you're looking at a year before these new places are habitable.
I don't know. I think if I think they could be fast tracked. I don't know the exact building cycle, but I mean, the problem you're going to have there, a bit more than anything else, is the labor to build them.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. Just because you have the money and the space, but
you got to
find some skilled help. I mean, I remember also during the boom, back in the early 2000s, and some of the quote unquote contractors, and the amount of people who bought new houses and were realizing my pipes already leak or my place is the electric's on fire. We just got a lot of challenges all at once hitting right now.
Yeah, we do. It's I almost feel like going down to the rabbit hole to see if Alice in Wonderland is still kicking around.
Yeah, well, and as you said, we're probably already there, and it's kind of undeniable. We're moving into the R word. A recession is coming. I mean, the advice I guess we could give most people is just batten the hatches, try to reduce your debt load, but don't panic and sell.
Yeah, the worst thing that can happen is do a panic sale. One thing that people should not try to do is forecast what the price is going to be 2 or 3 months from now. That's just wrong to do that. The last 2 years, it was easy because it just did this. It's doing this, but not like that. It's like this, and if it stays that way, we'll be fine.
Ride it out a few years later, it'll come back.
But once again, if you start seeing a ton of for sale signs in the city, we got a big problem coming up.
I got a feeling we got a few years of insanity. I mean, you can't. It's unavoidable to point out. I mean, definitely the pandemic has a lot to do with this. It's just messed up markets in every sort of way. I mean, was it 2 years ago down in Prentice where I live? I was watching the Odd Neighbors. They throw a for sale sign out front, and the place was gone in a day. And they were getting people bidding wars to get into these houses. And again, I mean, that's just not a healthy market either. I mean, that's superheating.
No, but that's the Bank of Canada's fault, if there is a fault. By putting that interest rate down to 0.25%, that just started a fire. You're paying a mortgage of 1.8%. That's unheard of, really, on a fixed rate.
Yeah.
And so people just went, okay, let's go, get her done.
Well, I don't know. What else do you think we got to look forward to before I let you?
Labor Day.
Labor Day.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think next Monday's a holiday.
It is. We're supposed to have some nice weather and such.
Yeah, it's supposed to be hot this week. I don't know. In terms of housing, I think that's about it. I mean, it's hard to nail it down, so to speak, because it's still kind of developing. Mm-hmm. I think we'll have a better sense for things by the time August is over. That'll be, I think, a much more clearer picture of what's going on. I mean, a lot of people right now have just said the hell with it, and they're on vacation, and it's like, the heck with it.
I'll deal with it when I get home.
Exactly.
It's been such a rotten couple of years.
Oh yeah, but that's a good thing to get going, get out, have some fun, enjoy your family, go see the people that you haven't been able to see for a while, and just forget everything. Because number one, if you dwell on it forever, it just gets worse.
Yeah, well, and we can lighten up now and then. That's part of the problem I have in this show. I'm always, ranting, raving, angry,
me too.
But that's what it's all about. But I mean, yeah, I see what you wrote about the Brad Pitt and some other stuff in a story a little while ago too. It doesn't always have to be real estate and dry stuff, I guess.
Well, no, and I don't focus just on that. I've got a couple of things in the works. I got a really good one that you're going to like. Company down in the States did a media survey, Rasmussen Reports. And they went to the big media outlets and asked the reporters and the editors what they thought were the major issues that they should be reporting. And then they went out and talked to the people on the street and said, what issues do you have that are most important? The two lists are entirely different. Entirely different.
That's not very surprising.
No, it isn't. But it's an indictment, I think, of the mainstream media, the legacy media, that without doing any homework, they just decide in the editorial meetings, oh, no, it's all about COVID. And then the people go, no, it's inflation. So the media, legacy media, wonders why everybody's turning them off. It's because they're not reporting on what people care about.
Well, that's what I've been pointing out a lot lately when it comes to climate change or COVID or all of these other things that may or may not be real threats, fine. But when a person can't make the bills, none of that crap matters anymore. If you can't pay the mortgage, you can't put food on the table, you can't get to work with your vehicle, you don't care if the temperature might go up a degree in 50 years or if there's a disease going around that's killing 1 in 100,000 people. You got more immediate concerns.
Oh, yeah, it's the kitchen table issues. People don't sit down at dinner and say, geez, I wonder if COVID's coming back. They're going, how are we going to pay the mortgage this month? That's the concern, obviously. The other one I'm going to tackle, and this will probably get me in trouble, is the climate change thing. I found some really good stuff that you'll also enjoy about from the way back in the beginning when they started first talking about this back in the middle 70s, 80s, using exactly the same phrasing that they're using now, except by 1980, the world would be just burning up, all gone.
Oh, there's only so much, apocalyptic copy out there. I mean, you just cut and paste, change the dates, and whatever the cost
exactly
is.
What they do.
And I mean, it never stops. I just remember, I was a voracious reader in a used bookstore, and I pulled out just randomly and bought this old used book back in the 90s, and that was the population time bomb, all the way back from, I think that came out in the late 60s, and that was the prediction that, we're all going to die because we're going to overpopulate. And
that's the same thing they're using now.
It's just there's always something. There's always an apocalypse around the corner. There's always a boogeyman that we've got to be afraid of. It gets exhausting.
Well, it's exhausting, but it's unfortunate because people buy into it, and you got 1 or 2% of the people in the world who are promoting all this apocalyptic stuff, and the woke people and that everybody's catering to. And there's like 98% of the people out there who are kind of like, huh? But so why are we? I think just pay them no mind. Just say, go away.
Well, I think that's starting to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at the ratings for conventional media outlets, and unfortunately, the government response is to try and bail them out. But instead, as you said, they should be listening to what people want to hear and providing it.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, lots to look forward to. I am looking forward to that one, and also, I mean, I just enjoy putting up those.
Well, Brad Pitt wearing a skirt. Come on.
Well,
that's news.
I noticed that the picture had Jolie next to it too. So I mean, there's eye candy for both sides, even if she might be crazy. I'm sure she has a lot of other assets that would have been admirable.
Oh yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, thanks for coming in to talk to me today, Myke. It was good to see you.
Always enjoyable.
We will chat again, I'm sure, soon.
Okay, great.
All right. Thanks.
Take care.
So that was the Western Standard's Myke Thomas. As we see, covers a broad range of issues from the pits to real estate, of course. There's been a lot of his specialty and things that he covers. And we're seeing a lot of things in the news. And see there, as we get the terminology correct. Because it's right, bubble makes you fearful of this giant pop. I mean, let's talk about a correction. Let's not panic, because that's how we actually take a problematic situation and turn it into a really bad one. Speaking of paying bills, I totally forgot to mention our sponsor yet today, but we kind of packed our guests back to back. So before I get on to some more news items, let's just remind you of the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. These guys are standing up for your freedoms. They provide resources for you. They're one of those things, again, it's like a membership with the Standard. It's an investment in yourself. Look, if you collect firearms, if you target shoot, if you hunt, any of those things that might involve firearms, you need to be a member of this group. They have resources for you, everything from whether there's upcoming firearm shows or gatherings, whether there's news items that are breaking, videos on safe firearm use, it's all there. And of course, most important of all, safety in numbers, working together as combined firearm owners. There's court challenges pushing back against this government that's trying to take away your firearms and your rights. So if you value those things, guys, you got to stand up for them or they will be taken away. Check them out. Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Tony Bernardo runs it, does a hell of a bang-up job. CSSA-CILA.org. And take out a membership, guys. It's worth it. All right, let's see what we got going on in the comment scroll. I see Theo Sandor Rogers. This professor may have a lot of evidence, but didn't mention the pure savagery of the idea to begin with, and probably some slithering old missionary or something, and stuff. And then you go into the Jewish aspect, which is completely irrelevant. But I mean, there's a valid question. I mean, the whole residential school concept to begin with. But as we dig in and as I've studied and learned on this, there was a lot of bad ideas. And there was no doubt there were some people who wanted to use them to actually outright assimilate, as they say, take the Indian out of the child, things like that. But a lot of it also was that was the only form of social service available back then. I talked about that the other day. We didn't have hospitals. We didn't have orphanages. We didn't have public schools. This was all run by the church back then, not by some crazed conspiracy. That's just the way our nation worked at that time. I mean, the West was a frontier. That's why all these schools are in the western side of Canada. They weren't in the East. And the First Nations people, and again, absolutely, there were some bad things happen. And there was a bad transition going on. Their land had been, the days of nomadic, type of lifestyles of hunting, gathering, they were gone. And they couldn't just freely wander and live off the land as they used to. But they didn't know how to live when they're packed into a spot. How could they? So there was starvation, there was disease, they were suffering a lot. And yes, the addition of alcohol really screwed with a whole lot of them. And a lot of unprincipled whiskey traders were pouring that into them. But it also led to a lot of children at risk. Then when you've got a household that's that unstable, that's that poor, that's that loaded with other abuses, unfortunately, a lot of these things are similar today, but we've just advanced, gotten better with the drugs that we're killing people with. But they brought the kids to those schools often to get them out of those situations. The other thing too, and I've said it before, go out and read the treaties. Go out and read them. You can find them online. I've got them on my own blog. You can read them verbatim. They aren't long documents. And almost every treaty, one of the clauses, because mostly they were simple documents, they were mostly focused on what the boundaries of the reserve would be and where the land was and such. But obligations, education was almost always in there because the chiefs and the leaders signing those did realize that right now they've got young, illiterate populations that are stuck with one foot in the traditional world with a modern world facing them outside. They were not adjusting well, and they were hoping, I don't think they were hoping for assimilation, but they're hoping to get these kids educated so they could be functional and prosper and do well down the road. The obligation was asked for these schools, not for abuse, not for beatings. I'm not saying they're asked for that, but the education they wanted. And the way to do it, the reserves, the people were living spread out. Residential schools were the way to pull them together into one spot in order to do that. You couldn't set up little schools everywhere, at least not yet. And later on, the residential schools began to be less and less. And that's part of what Mr. Rubenstein talked about as well. I was 150,000 students attended. That's it, over 100 years. Think about that, 1,500 students a year if you put it together kind of thing. Most of the students attended day schools. And it's not to say there was zero abuse even in day schools. But we got to get to the facts of what really happened because we got a lot of mythology happening. And as I watched the CBC coverage of the Pope's visit, and they keep talking about these survivors. I've seen 30-year-old survivors. Come on, guys. Just because you attended a public school doesn't make you a survivor, but now they're making it intergenerational. Let's see what happened and fix it. And yes, much of that comes down to investigating on now with this thing, because that's what spurred a lot of this, was this finding of anomalies in GPR, I should say, ground penetrating radar, in the Kamloops School and in other areas. But there's no missing children. Where did they go? Why would just in Kamloops alone, with apparently 200, were there not 200 families seeking them? Maybe they were, but what happened then? How did that happen? And we've got to exhume. We've got to follow up. We got to see what's going on. But instead, we just got apologies, and we get people who get upset anytime the discussion comes up. You should not. Nobody on any side of this issue should want to avoid digging in further, figuratively and literally. And we got to exhume these grave sites, if they are grave sites, and then find out why they're in there. And my back gets up when they try to shut down the discussion, when we say we shouldn't even talk about it. Well, then what are you trying to hide? Don't we want to get to the truth? That was always the thing about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Well, we need the truth part. But they're all fixated on the reconciliation. But again, there's a lot of people making a lot of money out of this. And I'm not talking about the individuals who get the settlement money. I'm talking about those parasitic lawyers and bureaucrats and activists who are at the head of the line on this. They're slurping on the gravy train. And they want this to be as scandalous as possible, as long as possible. They have very much a vested interest in keeping this issue as heated and emotional as possible. I'm getting tired of it. It's getting worse and worse. And that's why I keep going to these guests, because we've got to counter it. And again, people call us deniers and things like that. No, we're not denying that something happened. We just want to see exactly what happened. That's the thing. Let's see. Tired of this discussion. We've heard about it all our lives. I know, but it's still going on. So we still, every time, I mean, you see what we've seen now with the Pope's visit, just reignited the fires. And the demands for more and more settlements and more apologies and more things, you're tearing off a Band-Aid and not allowing a wound to heal. So we can't, even if we're tired of the discussion, doesn't mean we can stop having it. We have to, as tiresome as it might be. Surely saying we're looking at the history 100 years ago through the lens of today. And that's another aspect of it. We got to quit holding people to the moral standards of today that we did 100 years ago. And I mean, some of that, it's funny, I had a discussion with my daughter about that a little while back. How far do you go with a historical figure to cancel them, even if they did a bunch of good things, but they held some odious views on the side? At what point? Where's that tipping point? Sir John A. Macdonald, I mean, that's the one we're trying to erase these days, right? He's the founder of the country. He was an alcoholic. Sounds like he might have been a bit corrupt when it came to the railroad deals, but still, he was the country's founder. He did a lot of things, got a lot of things pushed through. But he was also one of the founders of residential schools. The residential schools were considered the nice thing to do at that time. They were. If anything, it was progressive people pushing these things as far as progressive goes in that period. So do you cancel everything good that he and others did at that time because they supported something else at that time? Let's not forget, Tommy Douglas supported eugenics. Yeah, he wanted to sterilize mentally handicapped people. But people on the left, at least, are willing to overlook that when they embrace the fact that he brought about universal health care, which I got a feeling wasn't necessarily this success that it was as well. We've got to have the conversations. And that's what we're here for. That's what this show is about. And digging in. And finding out the truth. Hymie gets in there and he's doing that. And he's putting those items out there, as is Brian Geisbrecht and Clifton and Tom Flanagan was another one I had on. There's another thing too. Say, you're just bitching about the price. I'm not. Flanagan pointed out really well, Professor Flanagan, when I had him. And I agree. If we saw outcome from all this spending, because we are spending billions and billions on the First Nations, and people keep saying we underfund them. Wait a minute. No, this is billions and billions on top of every other service that every other Canadian gets. I would be okay with it if it worked, if they were living okay, if there was good social structures, if they weren't living with malnutrition, high crime, poor education, poor health issues, unclean drinking water. How much are we going to keep throwing money at this when it's obviously not working? If it worked, I'd be a little more comfortable with it. But it's not. They're not living happily. For the most part, the people on those reserves, they're in misery. They're suffering. And I do want to see that change. And I see that just tossing more money at it isn't going to fix it. We got to look further. And part of it too is this culture of victimhood, this culture now when we're saying it's multi-generational, we're telling young, up and growing First Nations kids that you're victims. They're saying that the residential school policies of 100 and some years ago are impacting you today. And we're going to keep apologizing. And you're creating somebody with a dysfunctional view of the world that has a really hard time settling in and going out there. And we see that in the streets every day too. When you see the addicts and homeless people downtown, and you see that in Calgary anyways, I'd say 80% of them, if not more, are First Nations people. This is not serving them well at all. They're suffering. And again, we can't ease suffering by denying discussion on what really happened. But that's what we seem to be doing. So that's why I keep going on, even if we're tired of talking about it. Sarah's saying they have money for clean drinking water. I know. And something's gone wrong. And that's where we've got to look at it, right? This is systematic. We've got a problem. You were given the money and it didn't get to where it was supposed to. So it's not working. So let's change it. We're not allowed to discuss that. We're only allowed to discuss spending more money. And that's not a productive discussion. It's not helping anybody. Let's see, where else I'm going to hit a couple. Dave talked about that, the back and forth with our Governor General, speaking of government screwing you and unaccountability. So she tried to lay all the blame for her, $80-some thousand meals for her and her entourage as she flew to Europe that we got to pay for. She blamed it on the Air Force, and the Air Force is saying, hey, stuff it up your butt, Mary Simon. This was on you, and you're the one giving these meals to your buddies. So you know what? Both of them point their fingers at each other. Again, I say cut her budget to the bone. Give them a bunch of Happy Meals the next time they want to fly somewhere. She's making enough money otherwise. If she wants to feed her friends caviar, she can take it out of her own very fat wallet. There else we got, Harper endorsed Poilievre. That could be a game changer in a lot of ways. He holds a lot of sway and influence in the conservative circles of Canada, that's for sure, and he has a lot of respect. So, it's going to be hard to keep Poilievre from winning this leadership, and this makes it all the harder, I think, for Charest to try and get up and make that distance. So, we'll see what happens. Let's see, the EU, they're still dealing with an energy crisis. Yes, reality is coming into play with them, where they went into green investments and backfired on them, and now they're beholden to Russia. And it's funny, I'm not a big Trump fan, never have been, but I don't think everything he does is bad. I'm not one of those obsessed that go crazy, and I mean, just the mere mention of his name drives them, makes their hair pop out and they lose their crap. I'll admit, it doesn't matter whether I like a person or not when they're right. And there was a great before and afterwards, because I think it was 2018, I believe. But there was at some UN thing, and Trump was warning Germany, saying to them, you guys are getting way too dependent on Russian gas, and it's going to bite you in the butt. And they rolled their eyes at him. Look how they're sitting now. So again, he might have been wrong about many, many things, but he hit that nail on the head. He saw it coming. And we should see it coming here too, guys. We're not dependent on Russian energy, but if we keep shutting in our own resources idiotically for windmills that don't make enough power, we're going to have an energy crisis, or even a bigger one. All right. Well, that's enough ranting today. We covered a lot there. Let's see. Tomorrow, I have Ian Miller on. He's not the show jumper. He has actually written a book on, where is this book here? Book on masking anyways, and he's been quite an authority on that in the United States. And it sounds like we got people pushing again to bring in mask mandates. It's not done. It's never done, it seems. The book is called The Global Failure of COVID Mask Mandates. And we're going to have some discussions about this trend to bring back the lockdowns, bring back the masks, and whether they're going to do us any good whatsoever. May get another guest on as well. And of course, I'll have a fresh new rant and lots of news stories to cover and talk about. So thanks for joining me today, guys. I appreciate it, and I'll see you all again tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. sharp.